Okay, I have to announce the suspension of standing orders because we're going to hear from Paul Novak to address conference. Paul is the General Secretary for the TUC, and we're very privileged to have him here. Paul, would you like to?
Well, Rose, conference, it is a huge honour to be able to address your conference as TUC General Secretary and to bring solidarity from everybody at the TUC, our 48 unions, 5.5 million members up and down the country. In a few moments, I want to talk about your union, the work your union does every day to represent teachers and stand up for education, talk a little bit about TUC priorities. But let me just start by paying tribute to your members and the work that you do every day in classrooms. Put on record my appreciation for the incredible job that you do. Demanding work, difficult work, but life-changing work and life-affirming work as well. Giving every child from every background the best possible start. A few weeks ago, I visited primary schools in the Northeast. I saw firsthand the work that your members do and the work that other teaching and educational professionals do. It was humbling to see that work, the efforts of each and every one of those educators. And I know that that work is replicated in primary schools, in secondary schools, in sixth form colleges across the UK every single day. Funding cuts, staff shortages, endless reforms, bigger class sizes, kids coming into school hungry and tired because their parents can't afford to feed them or heat their house, all mean your members are doing more with less for less. And sometimes, as we saw with the tragic case of Berkshire head teacher Ruth Perry, those pressures can be absolutely unbearable. So together, let's demand a fit-for-purpose school inspection regime. Together, let's demand that instead of acting like a playground bully, this government actually listens to teachers and the voice of the profession. And together, conference, let's demand the professional recognition, the dignity and the fair pay that Britain's teachers deserve. And on pay, just let me say this, because I know you will be shortly debating the outcome of your consultation on the government's offer. Let's be clear, this government is hiding behind anti-union legislation. Their ballot thresholds, introduced as part of that Anti-Trade Union Act in 2016, were designed to make it hard for you to take industrial action, designed to disenfranchise workers who feel they've got no option to strike, designed to undermine unions. So let's send a message loud and clear from this government today. Stop hiding, start bargaining, sit down with Patrick, sit down with the other teaching unions and agree a fair pay rise for every teacher in England. Conference, fighting for a pay rise has been front and centre of your work in recent months, but it's not the only thing that you can be proud of. You've put international solidarity at the heart of everything you do, protesting against the demolition of schools in Palestine, supporting teaching unions in countries from Iran to Colombia. And you've highlighted some of the issues that really matter in our schools, whether it's the complex emotional and educational needs of refugee children or the terrible scourge of violence in our schools. And you've led the fight against misogyny, homophobia, and all forms of discrimination. And in Patrick Roach, you could not have had a more effective or eloquent champion in that work, not just in your union, but in the TUC's General Council and our Congress, and perhaps, above all, in leading the TUC's anti-racism task force, helping us transform the way that we organise, talk and bargain on race, so our movement becomes an effective force for racial justice, not a talking shop for racial justice or a commentator on racial justice, but a force for change in our unions, in our workplaces, across society. Patrick, thanks for everything you do on behalf of our movement. Conference, the challenges facing teachers are being replicated right across the economy. These are profoundly tough times for working people. We all know it. We've all experienced it. 13 years of Conservative government have broken this country. Whether that's struggling to get a GP's appointment, waiting hours for an ambulance, trains that don't arrive or are cancelled at late notice. This is a country where you can't even guarantee you'll buy tomatoes in the shops or even watch Match of the Day on telly, although if you're an Evertonian like me, that maybe comes as a light relief. Serious point, though, on this. I think we should applaud Gary Lineker for speaking out. Speaking out against this government's shameful asylum policies and speaking up for some of the world's most vulnerable people. And we saw the power of solidarity, didn't we, when Ian Wright and Alex Scott and Alan Shearer and others stood firm against political interference. And so, again, let's send the message out from this country, from this conference. This country should never turn its back on those fleeing poverty, persecution, or war. Our movement stands with all working people, wherever they were born, whatever their religion, whatever their background. Solidarity will always defeat the politics of division. Now, Conference, when I took over as General Secretary 3 months ago, and it feels a lot longer than that, when I took over 3 months ago, I said I had 3 key priorities. And the first one is simply this: to support unions and their members through the cost of living crisis. And it is a cost of living crisis, which in large part is a wages crisis. And teachers are on the front line of that crisis. The real value of your pay packet has fallen by a fifth since 2010. A teacher at the top of the upper pay scale has lost £76,000 in that time. And teachers' pay is now at the bottom of the graduate league table. The weekly shop's going up, the rent's going up, bills are going up, mortgages are going up, everything is going up apart from our wages. We live in a country where hospitals are setting up food banks for their own staff. Over a quarter of hospitals now with food banks to feed their own staff. Where firefighters and paramedics can't afford to put petrol in the car to go to work, and where head teachers can't recruit the staff our schools desperately need. Important to remember, though, it is not a cost of living crisis for everybody. It's not a cost of living crisis for everybody. Top bosses' pay is booming, up 23% last year alone. Dividends have gone up 3 times faster than wages. And if you're a city banker, you had the best year ever for bonuses since the financial crash last year. And here is one statistic, not particularly scientific, but one statistic that tells you all you need to know. Because while in-work poverty is spiralling upward, last year Porsche had their best ever year for sales in the UK, up by a third. Somebody's doing all right. It might not be all members, but somebody is doing all right. Now, I care, and I'm sure everybody else in this hall cares, more about the public and more about the pupils than I do about Porsche dealers. And that's why, ahead of the budget, we called on the government to make different political choices, choices that would have put the public and pupils first. And we saw little bits of movements on things like childcare, but there was no plan for growth. There was no plan for investment in public services. There was no plan, no money for public sector pay. Nothing on the fair taxes we need to fund our schools, our hospitals, our local councils. Delegates, fair taxes are the bedrock of any civilised society. And instead of dodging their taxes, it's time the rich paid their fair share, because we can't allow private affluence to sit alongside public squalor. So let's have a proper windfall tax on the profits of those energy giants. Let's equalise capital gains tax and income tax. Conference, it's time to raise tax on wealth, not working people. Now, over the last few months, hundreds of thousands of union members have taken industrial action, balloted for action, considered action. And it's because unions are standing up for workers that the government wants to kick lumps out of our rights. So my second priority is to push back on the attack on our employment rights, including our right to strike. We've got the EU retained law bill that will put at risk everything from paid holidays through to rights for equal treatment for part-time and agency workers. And we've got governments now intent on attacking a fundamental British liberty, the right to take strike. And be clear, this bill, the minimum services level bill, is designed to stack the odds against unions. It is legislation that will mean you can vote in a lawful industrial action ballot, get past all the government's hurdles and thresholds, your employer can tell you to work, and if you don't, you could face the sack. It is wrong, it's unworkable, it's almost certainly, if it gets onto the statute book, unlawful. It is a political attack on trade unionism, pure and simple. And that's why the TUC is working with our unions, with members of the House of Lords to expose the gaps in the bill, why we're exploring the best way of defeating it in the courts should it become law, and why we've made it very clear the TUC and our unions will stand by any worker sacked as a result of this legislation. Because when workers vote for industrial action, they never will stand alone. And I want to make sure that at the next election, this Prime Minister and this government pay the price for their attack on trade unions and pay the price for the misery they've inflicted on working people over the last 13 years. So this is my third and final priority. We need to secure political change. Now, the TUC, like the NASUWT, is not party politically affiliated, but I'm clear that the change we need is a Labour government at a UK level, standing on a manifesto that reflects the concerns of your unions and working people up and down the country. Now, at our Congress last year, Keir Starmer committed himself to a new deal for workers to be delivered within the first 100 days of a new Labour government. A ban on zero-hours contracts, a ban on fire and rehire, repealing anti-union legislation, giving unions the right to access workplaces physically and digitally, introducing new fair pay agreements to raise standards across whole sectors of the economy. All in all, a comprehensive package of measures designed to help reset the balance of power in Britain's workplaces. Labour's also committed to a massive wave of insourcing so that we spend taxpayers' money on services, not dividends for the big outsourcing companies, creating a new publicly owned Great British Energy run in our interest and bringing our railways back where they belong into public ownership, the first step in rebuilding and investing in our public services. And nowhere is the case for change more compelling than in education. As Patrick has said before, rightly, the system is at breaking point. That's why whoever is in government, we want fundamental change. Investment, not cuts. More staff, smaller class sizes, and an end to the ideological dogma and creeping privatisation. Because let's be clear, a few economic textbooks aside, the profit motive should never have a role in our classrooms or in education. Conference, I want an incumbent Labour government to signal a clear break from Tory decline. It's time to be bold, to fix broken Britain, to tackle injustice and inequality, to raise our wages and living standards and rebuild those shattered public services. But winning change won't happen because I've spoke to your conference saying we need it. And it won't happen because we wish it. It'll happen because we organise for it, we fight for it, and we vote for it. So our overwhelming priority must be to play our part, to build a stronger, growing, thriving trade union movement. And the best way to make our movement bigger and stronger is to make it more diverse and more representative. Whatever happens in the future, our best defence will always be building our membership, building our organisation, building reps in the workplace ready to take on bad bosses and win. And we must be a movement for all workers in all of our magnificent diversity. That's why I am determined that we embed the legacy of that anti-racism task force, that we put equality front and centre in everything that we do. And that, yes, we also root out the unacceptable scourge of sexual harassment in our workplaces and in our own movement as well. Because I want every woman to feel valued and welcome and safe in her own union. No ifs, no buts, no exceptions. Our movement has to be a zero-tolerance environment for sexual harassment. Conference, let me finish on this point. I mean, we can debate the history of the trade union movement, talk about the different models of trade unionism and all the rest of it, but at its core, trade unionism has always been about, will always be about, friendship and solidarity between working people. And that means that we do have to live and breathe those values of equality, justice and respect. Women and men, black and white, young and old, unity really is strength. So let's stick together, let's fight together, let's win together. Solidarity, brothers and sisters. Thanks.
I don't know if Simon's taking a picture, but oh yes, he is.